Do you like the north of England? Would you like to spend a couple of days doing nothing but playing board games, eating great food, in the presence of fantastic people, some well-known faces from board game media, and potentially Matthew Jude smelling great? Then come to AireCon between the 13th to 15th of March next year. Tickets and more information are available on their website. That's aircon.co.uk and also in the links in the show notes. And now, on with the show. Welcome to another episode of We're Not Wizards. My name's Richard. I'll be your host for October. And it's either Inktober or it's Halloween spooky month, whatever you want to be doing. But remember, this is the kind of the big run up to the kind of the festivities, and you know, people are getting ready. They're dashing left, right and centre. They're thinking about what they're going to be doing at the end of the year. They're thinking about what they need to do in order to kind of finish off the year. But they've got to remember to stop, smell the roses and enjoy themselves, because after all, while work is important, they've also got to remember that play is the thing as well. So joining me from playing the thing, I've got and he's got a 6 from the Belgian judges, so I think he's going to have to settle for bronze. It's Dr. Max Davie.
Good evening, Richard. How are you? We call it Rocktober in our house. It's Rocktober for reasons that are lost to time, but that's just what it is.
Do you start off with like a kind of a rocky? Is it a rocky day every day? Do you start off with a bit of Zeppelin, a bit of Iron Maiden?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Well, kind of. I'm sort of a bit more eclectic in my music taste. So I sort of stick on whatever happens to be on Spotify these days. But yeah, I mean, it used to be the kids were really into rock music, so we would just listen to rock music all October. But now they are all kind of K-pop and various bits and bobs. So.
Were you a man who rocked a longer do when you were a younger man then? I mean, are there pictures going about with a date with a man spouting what you would call a kind of a longer Davie at the back, potentially a longer haircut?
There's,
you know. So
my hair, when it grows long, is basically a kind of non-ginger Mick Hucknall, and that is not something you should be going for, really. So I've for the last 10 years I've cut my own hair, right. Grade 4 all over. That's the secret. You're peering behind the curtain, I'm afraid, Richard. That's the secret to my devastating good looks and
it's
coiffure.
Just a grade 4 all over. That is it. That is the reason. That's the reason.
Basically a grade 4. Well, whatever it is, yeah. Grade 3 or 4.
You're just breaking down the illusions just one bit at a time. Do you know what you're making me feel?
Better?
Well, potentially that the path to my own gloriousness is probably not much more than a number 4 away. If I'm being honest.
Absolutely
obviously.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly.
I have to grow the hair a bit to be able to shave it to a number 4, because I'm at that age where I've kind of having to go to a number 1 or a number 2 to look respectable. Otherwise, it just grows out straight, and I look like somebody that's had one of their hands on one of those, those static balls that you get. It kind of sticks up like that. Yeah. So it's kind of going. We brought you on for a couple of reasons. One has brought you on for a couple of reasons, Mr. Day.
You have been summoned hither.
You should also wait until you're addressed, young man, rather than just come.
Absolutely. Well, gosh.
Sorry. You do bring your highest confabularities, as you would say. You are, obviously, we mentioned, in my stunning intro, because it's good to blow your own trumpet, plays the thing, which is a podcast all about the importance of play itself. I am always interested in the board game question. How you get into board games is, everybody asks that. So let's ask a different question altogether.
Okay.
When you were kind of growing up as you know, in your, you know, in the family situation or whatever situation was it, how important was it for you to get together with, like, you know, brothers, sisters, members of family, and actually sit around a table or carry out some kind of activity together to do some kind of fun bonding or something like that?
I think I played quite a lot of games, workshop games, growing up with my brother, but we did an awful lot more collecting and looking at the games because they were very beautiful, but actually to play, they weren't very good. So we didn't really ever get into playing them repeatedly. I think the most games we would play would be when we were on holiday when we were sort of still a kind of conventional nuclear family before people went their own way. We would play endless card games and Trivial Pursuit, which looking back is a terrible, horrible game, but I was very good at it, so I didn't care when I was 13 or 14. So it was just my mum going, "How do you know all of these things?"
Well, how did you know? Did you cheat? Did you go through the cards and or were you just like a sponge?
I've always just absorbed facts just from just the ether, and increasingly, obviously now the internet. Some people just pick up facts and pick up and notice little things, and I've always had that kind of brain. And now my son has kind of inherited that brain, and he's even better than I ever was.
My son is the same. I think I used to gather around the dinner table, and the kids would say, "What's fact of the day?" And they would just say, "Well, give us something, and I'll tell you a fact about it," you know, kind of thing. Which is always kind of good fun. But so did you rule the Trivial Pursuit roost?
Very much, yeah. Which absolutely infuriated my brother, who may be a We're Not Wizards listener at this point. So sorry, Ben. I was never very gracious about it, if I'm completely honest. But
he told me off cast that one of the things he wanted us to bring up was the whole Trivial Pursuit thing, just so he could casually mention the number of times he basically what did you say? Ground him into the dirt.
Ground him into the dirt.
Left him.
Yeah.
Was it?
Put my hand on his neck.
Left him pileless. I think you called. I don't know if you called them pies or called them cakes. In terms of this,
they were pies.
They were pies, weren't they?
For no reason.
They're definitely. I used to know people that used to say, "Oh, have a slice of cake."
Yeah, that makes it a bit more jolly.
It does, but you know, pies. If you're winning, it's of course it can turn around on itself and ask you, you know, well, you've obviously got all the pies. And I say yes, but it's glad that you don't have them, because otherwise you would eat them all. So there you
would
go.
Eat them all.
There you go. You dropped in with kind of like Games Workshop stuff. So were you?
Yeah.
Were you into the beginning stuff of kind of, I guess, the crossover between kind of MB games? So was this Hero Quest, Advanced Hero Quest, or were you taking a?
No, it was a bit later than that. I'm a little younger than that, Richard. Wow. So I was growing up in the late 80s. So I suppose it was early Advanced Space Crusade, and it was lots of Warhammer, and Space Hulk, I think, was still around, but we didn't own that. I think Advanced Hero Quest we had for a while. So yeah, no, it was that kind of thing, and it was all beautiful, lovely boxes. And we had Mighty Empires, which I still own, actually. Mighty Empires, which is the kind of it takes the Warhammer world and kind of zooms out, and you can play what looks a little bit more like Civilization with hexes. And I actually converted that into a game for my kids a few years ago. It's got lots of lovely bits, and they all have lots of lovely bits, don't they? And the whole feel of them is great, but the mechanisms are, I think, pretty dire, looking back.
So, kind of growing up, were you always a kind of like the playful child? I mean, did you get to kind of like the ages of 13, 14, and you were kind of like, no, it's serious time now, things are happening, I am growing up, I am changing, I'm putting away my boys' toys? Or were you trying to still kind of casually kind of justify buying yourself a Lego set at the age of 17 kind of thing, but it's technical Lego kind of thing?
I think that's a really good question, because I think of playfulness and you think of a particular sort of playfulness, a kind of almost childish playfulness, but I don't really think of play like that, and this is why I think the podcast tries to explore all sorts of different play. So we've talked about interactive theatre, and we've talked about board games and video games, and we've talked about just all sorts of, play at museums and how people kind of put play into museum spaces and all sorts of things. And I suppose you play in different ways in different parts of your life, don't you? So when I was a teenager, a lot of my playfulness went into an interest in comedy and an interest in kind of sketch comedy and writing that sort of thing, which I don't do anymore. But I think some of that stuff has now gone into kind of the talks I have to give as part of my job, or and then gone back into games as my kids have grown up, and I've discovered sort of modern board games about 5 years ago, like everyone else.
So were you kind of the comedy stuff and the sketch stuff? Was there kind of any particular influences that you followed? Because I remember at that time there was the cracking on with like the Mary Whitehouse Experience, and then there was like Newman and Baddiel coming in, and then Baddiel went off and did his own thing with Frank Skinner. So did you have particular kind of...
That was very much the sort of era, and in fact it suddenly came back to me that we were up in... the one time I did the Edinburgh Fringe with a sort of troupe of people from medical school. We were in a bar with Baddiel and Skinner, and they were... the only thing I remember is that they were substantially more successful with the girls there than me and my slightly specky medical school friends were, which is not a big surprise. So they were actually, funnily enough, probably the influence, the original influence was things like the Goon Show, and going really far back. I liked the silliness of that, and actually a lot of the stuff that we would do was much more kind of just silly. I mean, obviously, like everyone else, Monty Python was it and was the greatest thing. But we didn't really particularly... I mean, I liked the Mary Whitehouse Experience, but I never loved it in that way. I mean, obviously, Blackadder as well, obviously. If you wanted to be clever, then everyone would just look at Blackadder and how amazing those scripts were. I
kind of thought it kind of got pushed to the side, I think. I remember there was a lot of... let's put Blackadder Goes Forth on at BBC Two, and let's have Newman and Baddiel on kind of BBC One. But if I go back and watch an episode of Newman and Baddiel, at the time they were kind of like they were the first guys that says, "Oh look, we've sold out an arena." And I remember buying the video where they kind of did their actual kind of big arena tour, and that was a huge thing at the time. Because obviously nowadays stand up comedians, if they're not doing like a five night sellout stadium tour, there's some kind of they're middle of the road. They're kind of almost there, but they haven't kind of got it.
It's become a big business.
But on the other side of it, Blackadder just seems to have aged very, very well in terms of especially two and 4. And I think as I get older, the almost childish pomposity of 2, there's 4 has kind of really, really etched itself in my heart with regards to kind of the kind of, because I'm, to be honest, and you're probably almost the same. You're kind of almost the same age as the characters that are in the kind of the show,
absolutely
kind of thing, and I kind of identify kind of more with them. Have you ever been tempted to pick up the pen and sketch a couple of things? Kind of like, again, was there any point in the podcast you thought, well, let's have a comedy 5 minutes, let's write something. You did, didn't you?
I think I've got a couple of ideas, but it's just they've got to have the format. I think there's lots of funny podcasts within the kind of board game space, aren't there? But none that did that sort of scripted comedy that can very easily go wrong. I mean, I have had brief conversations with Dan Hughes, obviously late of this parish, who've thought about that sort of thing. But I think you have to be you've got to be really good, and you've got to invest a lot of time if that stuff's going to work. I mean, if you look at obviously our old friend Laura Deming, she's one of the funniest, in terms of scripted comedy.
You're a very brave man to be bringing that up against somebody who's technically going to be editing you later on.
Okay, Paula Deming then. Her stuff is beautifully scripted, beautifully produced, and there are points at which you go, okay, I'm never going to be as good as that person at doing this. I don't have the talent or the time or the expertise. So I'm going to do what I do, and I'm going to bring what I bring to that. I mean, I bring sort of curiosity and questions and somehow the ability to kind of find interesting people to talk to. And I think what I bring is a kind of a lack of focus on one kind of play. So you get all sorts of cross-pollination of different kinds of play being discussed, which I think is kind of one of the nice things about the pod is, talk to a historian and then a psychologist and then a lecturer in English literature and then a guy who, designs games and then a play therapist and, all of these different people kind of coming through.
Do you reckon that just having the kind of the board game people on is a bit kind of restrictive then? Do you think that when people are talking to play that I should be, for instance, reaching out to these other people? I mean, I had a fascinating conversation with Sam Illingworth when he was on, but then I listened to your episode with him and I absolutely had to stop the car, rip the entire stereo out the car, throw it, it's a rental car, it was fine. An Iceland van went into the back of my car and wrecked it. But anyway, so this is a rental, and I threw it at the side and I went, oh my goodness, those questions are so good. They're so good in that conversation. It's so informative. And I hate it. So I'm a little bit, I was a little bit kind of jealousy, kind of getting you on the show tonight. And, and now, and I did kind of want to not like you. And, you've been talking for 20 minutes and I'm just like, yeah, he's a really nice guy. But do you think when we're talking about maybe, we're fine where we are?
Let me. You are absolutely fine where we are. So I think in a way there's two. Podcasts are a really interesting form of entertainment for me because obviously all podcasts need to be entertaining to some extent, and some also are to feed a particular community, and there is literally nothing wrong with that. So you and Sporadically Bored and This Game is Broken and sort of the people who kind of have connections with your informal network, do you know what I mean? And are staying in are about games and for people who like games, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. And staying in actually is probably more. I'd love to have those guys on because I love how they bridge board and computer games completely. Often you forget if you're not paying attention which one they're talking about, which is so cool. But I think the other reason for podcasts is to bring the general public in the things that are maybe of interest to anybody. So everyone's got a vague interest in play and kind of playing. And so I suppose, so mine, I don't think I'm ever going to get a community around my podcast in the way that you get a community around Sporadically Bored, for instance, or because you've done a little bit of community building, haven't you? But not a great deal.
Yeah, you mentioned the staying in guys, and they just seem to have it kind of right. But then community is community because I wouldn't consider I've got a huge community. But then at the same time, I think you kind of sell yourself maybe a bit short in terms of the number of people who would generally be interested in having a further discussion. I think...
Yeah, it's just where to do that, really.
I think a Facebook group, if you set one up, I think people...
Well, I have got one. It's Play is the Thing on Facebook, but thank you very much for the lead-in to the plug.
I'll just set them up, you just keep knocking them down. But I think...
Yeah, I'll just play
in terms of the kind of the discussion about it, in terms of the people wanting to have that discussion, I think there are some people who are wanting to have a further discussion on
extremely
the things
welcome
behind
to
it.
come and join and have a chat. Yeah, absolutely.
So what was the name of that Facebook group again then?
It's called Play is the Thing, which is the same as the name of the podcast, which you've now said a few times. So hopefully people have heard it now, which is great.
I might just bleep it all out.
You should be in marketing.
I might just bleep it all out. I might be,
Yeah.
just like, what's it called again? Beep.
Max failed to pay his marketing fee, and therefore let that be a lesson to the rest of you.
That's terrible. Nobody pays to be on this show. Do you know the only people... No, it's not. We're sponsored by, was it AireCon? Depends when this goes out. It might be somebody else, but we are, you know.
Are you sponsored by AireCon? Is that serious? Yeah. Oh, that's lovely.
Yeah, they said, oh, go kind of, you know, as long as we put, you know, we'll have a little thing at the beginning of the show, which is kind of cool. But that encourages me to be like basically a fanny, because most people would just kind of like have a message and just have the same message. And I've been encouraged to actually start different messages and what can I do about this, and kind of make it kind of topical and stuff like that instead. But yeah, I mean, we're a big fan of AireCon, and we could have a short section where I could explain how I really, really like the idea of going to AireCon, and I'm really desperately sad that I'm not going to go. Why?
Well, because I was a limited amount. I mean, I'm in busy life, I suppose, is the short answer. Busy life. A lot of stuff that is not game related that has to be done.
You've got job and commitments, and let's face it, going and spending
family.
any time anywhere is always going to cost kind of money, isn't it?
It's time, really. It is time, and time spending, you know, spent with the family is quite important. Absolutely. In terms, you know, we're kind of skirting around the reason that you're here. I mean, I don't think you've mentioned your podcast at all yet. I've not even talked about it yet.
One little bit. But what...
I'm like the Stephen Bonacore of tiny podcasts.
Why'd you have to bring him up?
Why?
We've had a truce. Right. I mean, it's a very, very kind of loosey-goosey trucey at the moment. But, you know, even bringing him up, it's like you're coming on here being more intelligent and articulate, and then you have to bring up the name of one of my worst enemies.
Your nemesis. What's the surname? Plural of nemesis. Nemesis must be nemesis.
Ask him, Dan Hughes. Nemesis. He knows when he calls Mike D'Alessio an nemesis.
Yeah, he's brilliant. You know? He's the most erudite person I've ever met.
It's ridiculous. He knows exactly what he's doing. But anyway, when you were... I don't want to keep plugging them, because folk will go away and go, oh yeah, that reminds me, I've got to listen to this episode of Sporadically Bored because it's really good, and then you just switch it off, and then that's it. Doesn't matter how many times you mention your podcast, because it'll be gone into the ether.
Yeah.
Away. I mean, going back to yourself and your career, when you went to... you said the phrase medical students, I guess you weren't...
I was a medical student for some years.
You just didn't hang around with a group of medical students and say, if I hang around with these guys, at least they'll probably get the bar bill.
Eventually someone will give me a stethoscope. Exactly. No, that wasn't quite how it worked. But they did, actually.
You can't... You just lie and then come back with it. This is what's actually a true lie, and it's just not. It's just disappointing. But
people have done it.
I'm sure they have.
Passing for doctors for some time. Yeah. I think the latest case was fairly recently in the UK. Someone was pretending to be a psychiatrist, which made me laugh very much. How long they got away with being a psychiatrist, not knowing anything. There you go.
I don't know. Was that from a point?
Is that a comment on psychiatry or not? I couldn't possibly comment.
Oh, come on! You can't kind of drop yourself in there and then try and scramble back out the pit with leaving your nails embedded in the wall as you go, kind of thing.
I have a lot of friends that are psychiatrists. I'm not going to dump them in it, but anyway, it's just interesting that was the specialty she got away with.
I mean, it's what you're not saying that's really, really interesting.
I'm leaving a lot of space. So yeah, so long story short, and actually it is relevant to the podcast, I think. I qualified 20 years ago, and went into paediatrics because kids are less smelly than old people and get better quicker and are more fun, basically. And that was all right, and hospital paediatrics was really kind of exciting for a while, but I think what really kind of bit me was what we call community paediatrics, which is basically neurodevelopmental paediatrics. So it's things like autism, and more latterly I've been really into ADHD, and it's just being able to get to know these kids with these amazingly different brains. And initially it was the autistic kids who fascinated me, because these sort of absolutely perfect but very different brains. There's nothing wrong. It seemed to me very early on, very obvious to me that there was nothing wrong in itself with an autistic brain. It was just different, and we just had to understand it in a different way. And actually, the more I read about it, the more that kind of impression is reinforced. And so play and the discussion of play and the patterns of play are really important when you're looking at what kind of neurodevelopmental profile a child has, because that comes out. It's a really good way of it coming out. I mean, be it an autistic child who finds social play very difficult, or an ADHD child who just can't sit still and is all over the place. Play is really important in my work, and encouraging play is actually really important if you're trying to help children to express themselves and develop themselves. And so it was it's another way into thinking about play. And actually the last couple of episodes I'm going to bring out this month are about they're really about play and the autistic spectrum, and what it's like, and how we should think about people with autism and how the way that they play, and how it's different, but in exactly the same way, really, how it's different but no less valuable.
But in your experience, and I mean, I've got two kids at high school and one child at primary school. In your experience, do you think that the number of children with kind of autism and ADHD and things like that has increased, or do you think that we're more willing to kind of give a diagnosis on that level?
I think the diagnosis has changed. So historically, we used to give a lot more diagnoses of learning disability, and now that's been replaced by autism in a lot of cases, which is an advance, because actually, if you look at autism, then if you look at someone as having autism, then you can adjust yourself to them, so you can communicate better to them. So I think that's, in many cases, an improvement. I think the ADHD, we certainly had a massive increase in the diagnosis of ADHD. Usually that's replaced awkward bugger or naughty child or, or just Borstal case. Does that translate for you?
Yeah, no, I remember that. I mean, growing up.
That's what people used to call those kids. And those labels were very dismissive. Now, there are valid concerns about labelling everyone who's having problems with their behaviour with ADHD, but I think if you're careful with who you select out, then it can be a very useful diagnosis to make, in my view.
I think growing up, there was a lot of separation and stuff. So I remember even being at high school, there were kids in my class who just could not grasp concepts, certain things at all, and they went to the learning support side of things. There was the kids that were they just could not sit still, and the teacher would they would just get disciplined, and that was it. They would end up spending an entire high school completely being, standing outside the rector's office so much that they would be digging a hole in the side of the wall where they were leaning against it, kind of thing.
Yeah. They had their own little spot.
Yeah, and I think nowadays, I think that there's a strive to kind of integrate all children into a similar space, and I think with that it kind of brings its own degree of challenges, because teachers used to be a case of, I'm going to shout at the naughty kids, I'm going to love the kids that do the stuff that I want them to do, and then the kids that maybe need the additional support, then I'll deal with them 60% of the time, and the rest of the 40% of the time they're going to another room for additional support anyway. And nowadays they have to kind of walk a fine tightrope so much that I know that every class that my son has been in at primary school so far, there's been additional assistance in there. There's been other adults in there.
Well, that's standard.
Yeah. Yeah.
Teachers have an incredibly hard job to do. I'm not completely sure that it's got harder. I think that it's become more obvious how hard it is, and the expectations are on them of bringing everyone with them, and have increased. So the kids that they used to just send out all the time, they're now expected to engage with and try and get the best out of. And that does create an additional burden for teachers. It is definitely harder for them. But of course, no one would now argue that these kids don't need to be engaged, that they can just be kind of left in the corridor, throwing a ball against the wall. So it is about as a system, we've made things harder for ourselves while stripping the whole system of money, which obviously, not a political podcast, but yeah, there's not much money around. Have you noticed?
It depends. I mean, all of a sudden, somebody seemed to have found lots and lots of money down the back of their couch quite recently to find
well, the magic money tree has appeared.
Yeah,
yes, quite.
Yeah, they stole it.
Yeah, we're going to build 40 new hospitals. Oh, no, we're not. We're going to just refurbish 6.
As a political aside, and we talk about this in the office all the time, I just want a political interviewer. I want certain people gone from reporting on politics because their bias is just ridiculous. But I think they should have a political VAR system. And what it means, right, is they basically have the ability, when they think that somebody said something dodgy, they just go, right, we're just gonna check. And then if they're lying, they call them a liar.
Yeah.
Because there's this kind of expectation they don't actually say you're lying.
I know. They need to sort of live fact checking, don't they?
Just say, actually, you're lying there. This is not true. There's not 40, there's 6. It's just
yeah.
I understand where the money's coming from. In terms of then, when you're dealing with children of different kind of areas, do you approach the play in the same area, or do you have to approach the play in a different area? I mean, because people talk about kind of obviously overstimulus in terms of kind of ADHD and stuff like that. So when it comes to approaching the play side of things, do you get that involved as part of your job, or is that
not directly? I do have conversations with parents about play, but I wouldn't call myself a sort of therapist of any kind. I mean, I think generally speaking, getting overstimulated can be difficult for all sorts of children with developmental problems. But I've been thinking quite a lot about how overwhelming a sort of conventional a group play space can be for a person with autism, for a child or adult, really. And how I think if you're trying to include people with autism, and we know in the hobby there's lots of people with various degrees of difficulty, don't even want to say difficulty, various degrees of autisticness about them. And I think, it's kind of, we need to maybe think a bit more about what is about these environments that's hard for them. Are they too noisy? Is there too much visual stimulation? Is there too much social expectation? Not that we should, have a separate autism area, conventions or anything, but I do think it's just something to think about if you're thinking about your group or people coming in, and whether one of the reasons they might be finding things stressful is noise and light, and too many different things going on at once. Conversely, I think with ADHD, they need a lot of stimulation. I should say because I also have a diagnosis of ADHD, but we need a lot of stimulation. And so very slow play can be very difficult. But also children with ADHD, particularly if they are not being stimulated by the activity, then they will just find other stuff to stimulate them. They'll just find other things to. So it can be both of those groups. And of course, if you've got both, then it's extra challenging. Both of those groups can be challenging to play with. What I do is I run a board games club at my local school, where George, who Richard met, but the podcast listeners won't have met, attends. And I don't know everyone's diagnosis, but I am absolutely convinced that there's a number of children who could be diagnosed in the club. And it's very challenging. It's very challenging, but it's worth it, because if you get it right, they really get a lot out of play. But you've just got to sort of meet them halfway in a way.
Is it just the simple fact that kids aren't all the same. I mean, is it the fact that, you know, everybody... I mean, I know I go to the club, the board, when I go to the club, you know, but when I go to the board game club, there are quite clearly people who I'm interacting with at the club who need a game that they're playing to have as little downtime as possible. They need to be constant, or their brain needs to be occupied. You know, you know, they love to play something like Santorini. They would hate to play, you know, something like Viticulture, where they're maybe sitting there for, you know, or Terraforming Mars, where they're sitting there for 10, 15 minutes between turns, and you can see them, and you can see certain people that you sit them down in front of a game, and they're not like a savant or something like that. It's just that they are able to completely solely focus on every single aspect of this game, and they're able, you know.
Sorry. I think that's what's so fascinating about the hobby. It's how it shows our brains to each other, because it's personal, because we're there in front of each other. We can really see how each other responds to different scenarios and different situations, and the meshing of the game experience and mechanics and the magic circle of gaming with the particular personalities involved is so endlessly fascinating. And these kind of variabilities of different games and different players and different scenarios, and you know, just different times of day and different moods that people are in. This gives it no two games of a board game are the same. And I think that's not true. I mean, if you play a lot of... I think video games are more uniform in the experience of the video game. I think there's so much more texture in terms of the personalities to a board game, which is why I think one of the main reasons that I enjoy them more.
Yeah, no.
A lot more in video games.
I was playing Santorini on Friday for the first time and thoroughly enjoyed it, but we ended up the night with I think it was a 4-player game, and but those final moves... That's the sort
of team variant, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we just played single, and we just each had one pawn, and there was 4 of us, and that's what we did. But the final move, by the time we were playing the final move, it was such an atmosphere around us in terms of the table that we had actually 4 or 5 people had just gathered round to watch, just to see who would kind of win. So the interactivity was there, and everybody was kind of having a laugh. I know that in other places, in other times, I could put Santorini down, I would probably end up potentially 2 or 3 people kind of sitting in silence, just because they would be wanting to concentrate kind of on the kind of the optimum moves. What would you say would be your ideal play? I mean, I mean, kind of, as you say, kind of like that could be relaxing, that could be focusing your mind on something else, that could just be doing something kind of energetic or non-energetic, just something that, you know, isn't necessarily productive but is also productive for you as a person. I mean, what would you say your ideal play would be?
I mean, I think that, so if I could play sort of anything with anyone, I think I would have a group of my grown-up friends for an evening when no one's exhausted, and we would play a number of hour-long, not much longer than that, board games, and just have a lovely time. And then we'd play a mixture of different things. Maybe go a little bit higher. My favourite game is probably Root at the moment, and of course that's not an hour-long board game. So I would play a game of Root, and then a game of, I don't know, something like Jamaica, or then something light like I'm really enjoying. There's a Hand of the King. It's a Game of Thrones themed game, but it's a very nice little abstract game that doesn't take very long to play, and it's really fun. So that sort of thing. That would be my ideal play experience at this point. But equally, you know, in a different mood, because I'm quite tired tonight. In a different mood, it would be, let's play something quite stupid with 5 excitable 8-year-olds, let's play, I don't know, Werewords, or there's a guy, there's a book called The Floor is Lava. There's lots of really silly games in that, which can be all played with no equipment. Take some excitable kids out to a park and have a picnic with a picnic blanket and a copy of the Floor is Lava and play some stupid games. That would be also a wonderful play experience. I don't really mind all that much.
Yeah, I'm kind of really enjoying Rhino Hero Super Battle at the moment, just because of how absolutely ridiculous it can get. And there's points
it's absurd.
Where you want to knock it all down, and then there's other times which you're standing in the living room and something has almost reached the light shade because you've managed to build it architecturally perfect, and I'm staring at my boy and going, look at what we have created. And then he goes, oh yeah, and then he just flicks the whole thing down and goes, you won. And then that's kind of it.
I love the building aspect of that. I think that, this is nitpicking, but I think they could have done more with the fighty bit. I think the fighty bit's really a bit boring. The kind of, oh, I've ended up on the floor with you, let's both roll a dice. Oh, you go down. It's just, I think they could have done lots and lots more with that, and without making it complicated.
Yeah, I think they had a really, really good idea with the building thing, and then they went, I don't know what we do to kind of what happens when somebody beats another floor. I would like it to see a case where you forced a different piece if you won on that person, because it's all about kind of piece selection. And I reckon you could be able to say, well, if I won, you could get this.
That's a nice idea.
You could get this one instead. That kind of thing. But there's different things. But I like the accessibility. I like the fact I could probably take a room full of kids and just play it. King Domino is another game. And I do. King Domino is another game which seems to do extremely well in terms of how it works. So I'm a big kind of fan of it. Why the podcast though? There's obviously. Was it because it was your turn to make one? Did you get contacted by the National Podcast Association and said, we have noticed it's like the postcode lottery. Your postcode's come up and we've not got a podcast in your area. Do you mind making one? Kind of thing, or did you notice a kind of a gap in the market and think, well, normally it's just a couple of people sitting around giving their opinions on whether or not they like something, and I've got something more to kind of offer. It
came from my previous attempt at internet stardom, which is I'm sort of kind of on hiatus from, which was kind of games for families, which was YouTube, a little bit of YouTube, a little bit of Facebook, kind of games for kids and games. Me and my kids used to make videos, and we've stopped that for a bit. And I thought, well, actually, I was talking to Dan Hughes, and I was like, I don't want to be a guy who reviews the latest hotness. I want to lose because I was getting quite bad FOMO. I was getting quite bad, I want to buy this, I want to buy that, I want to be going to all of the conferences, conventions, and I want to be the guy who's got everything. And I sort of wanted to stop doing that, but I still wanted to really engage in what was such a fascinating area. So I thought, well, what could I do? I'll think about what am I actually interested in, and what I'm actually interested in is play. I'm not massively into video games, but I'm really fascinated by them as a social phenomenon. And actually, I suppose the other thing that happened was, I'm also, one of my other jobs is I'm head of health improvement for the Royal College of Paediatrics, and we wrote screen time guidance for parents at the beginning of the year, which really stirred up a lot of thoughts and lots of discussions about kind of people who feel that video games are kind of corrupting the youth and poisoning our young people. And I've never accepted that, but looking into the science of it was just really interesting. Attitudes to play and what is good play and what is bad play are just really prevalent and often unstated, but the disapproval of video games is something that I react against, even though I don't particularly enjoy them myself.
Yeah, I think it's always a case, but that's always been down the generations of what people kind of like and enjoy and kind of activities and stuff like that. It used to be, people used to kind of really, really think that, they should, if they're going to start anything, it should be smoking. those people kind of running about instead, like Daphne's kind of going nowhere in a circle. I mean, what's that all about? A kind of thing. Video games.
The point is a good one. In the 19th century, people were treated for reading addiction. Young ladies who were reading too many novels were sort of being sent to clinics to kind of, because or were great concern with, and people were writing to the Times about it. Great concern about the scourge of our young people, which was this novel thing. Socrates thought we should never write anything down because it would rot our brains. So it always, every new form of play, every new form of information technology, there will be a moral panic about. What we have at the moment is something which is both the dominant form of play and an information technology. So it's kind of the perfect storm for moral panic. That's my view anyway. I think I I'm getting quite a lot of arguments with people about it, but
I think if there's anything that I have an issue with, and I stand on Hypocrisy Mountain, saying, "Don't look at me, look at yourself," is the kind of the social media stuff, because I maybe didn't have as good a time as high school as I could. I did have good times, but I also didn't have amazing times. I think everybody was in the same boat, and I would hate to think if you were a teenager going, if you walk into class and you had toilet roll stuck on the bottom of your shoe. When I was growing up in high school, you'd get the usual people taking the Michael out of you, and then that would be it. If you do it nowadays, there'd be 50 people taking a photograph of you, and the next thing you know, you've got 50,000 likes on Instagram, and you're being known as Poo Poo Shoe Boy.
But you'd be known as Poo Poo Shoe Boy anyway. Just to play devil's advocate, to just quickly, there's a few things to say about that. Yes, absolutely. And bullying online as probably, if you are bullied and you're also bullied online, that probably makes the bullying more damaging. And we think bullying is a major kind of public health problem, actually. However, very few people are bullied only online. Yes. And also, just as you would come home and, let's say you've been Poo Poo Shoe Boy at school and everyone's been laughing, you've had a horrible day, and you come home and your parents are busy or stressed or a bit preoccupied, so they can't support you. But then you go online to your Minecraft server or your League of Legends server or whatever, and you talk to your friends, the people who don't call you Poo Poo Shoe Boy because they don't know about the poo poo shoes, So actually, or conversely, and the thing I always come back to is that a child who's growing up gay in a scenario where they can't come out or they don't feel they can be themselves, and then come home and they can talk to other young people in the same situation. So I think if you look at the data, there's a really lovely recent study that showed that they looked at the amount of social media that teenagers were consuming and whether there's an association with lower well-being. And it was so weak, however, it was as strong as whether you eat potatoes or not. So how much potato you eat, it has as much effect on your well-being as how much social media you consume. And social media is slightly less associated with poor well-being than wearing glasses. Which is bad for you, I'm afraid.
I just there's a whole load of equivalencies there, and I'm just like going, what? I want to know what else. you kind of step that off, and I'm going, so it's potentially as bad as eating potatoes. I can
put you in touch with one of the researchers. She's really lovely, and I'm sure she'll tell you what else comparisons she ran.
It's going to be if you wore this particular types of shoes. Do you like chewing gum? Yes. Well, you're definitely slightly happier than if you went on social media.
But that shows the ridiculous. Clearly, that shows the so if you find these really tiny associations, and then you assume that is causal. That really what's Amy and Andy, who were the people who did the research, were showing is that it's silly to find this tiny little variations in the data and say, oh well, this is causing this, because you can find anything. If you have enough data, you can find anything you want, really.
I think it's kind of. It depends, I think, on the type of personality as well, that if they are using it on a certain basis, they might kind of take it more seriously. I know how easy it is to kind of feel absolutely alone in the world, and then knowing that you're thinking that everybody now knows that what happened, and it turns out that everybody else has got their own stuff to be kind of getting on with, so there's kind of that kind of thing. But going back to the question about the podcast, so but I have it all locked in. It says I know where I'm going with this. You just have to bear with me for that.
That's fine. I will bear with you.
Thank you.
It's fine.
But then, what made you decide, let's bring in guests, let's have people to chat to? Was it a case of, were you tempted to kind of do a series and just say, well, let's me have a chat to you about my opinions and thoughts on the matter, or were you kind of fairly driven to go out and get the kind of the guests?
I wasn't ever tempted to do that, because I had sort of done it a little bit. My main real expertise, of course, is in child development, and I had done a series of videos for the Dice Tower last year on the usefulness of games for child development, which are still on YouTube, and you can go and look them up. So I sort of felt that from my point of view, from my scientific knowledge, I had done everything at that point I wanted to say. I'd said everything I wanted to say. So the next step was obviously to find out what other people thought. And actually, I think, again, I mean, if you think about podcasts, which is only one person, that it's very difficult to do well. I mean, obviously Ben, our mutual friend Ben Maddox is fantastic at it, but they take a long time to write, and to get right. It's like the scripted comedy thing we were talking about earlier, whereas a chat, the other person's structuring you, and it's just much, much easier. It doesn't need to be rehearsed or scripted at all. Yeah. I mean, obviously this is tightly scripted, Richard, as you know, and you run a very tight ship, and I'm very impressed. But generally speaking, this kind of chat is relatively unstructured.
So the answer to the question was, you did want to get guests on then. If you can go down to it's page number 7, line 182. That tells you how you meant to ask it.
Yes, I had to have guests because I did not want to listen to my own voice for any longer than I had to.
That's close, but it's not what I've got written on the card. But anyway, do you have a kind of...
It's good, but it's not right.
But it's not. It's close, but it's not what I've got written on the card. Welcome back to Catchphrase. Is there a super duper Starship Trooper set of guests you would like to come on? I mean, I've had the Staining guys on.
The dream guest.
Yeah, I've had the Staining guys on. They're fantastic.
Yeah, I would get the Staining guys on. They're not my dream guests because I think they may be achievable. So if you have an unachievable guest, I would love... Taskmaster?
Yes.
I am so into Taskmaster at the moment, and I think it is such a playful show.
Yeah.
Just, silly things done in this really quite deadpan way. No one's kind of, look at me, I'm so wacky on that show. They're just doing ridiculous things and laughing, but in a quite unself-conscious way. And the genius behind Taskmaster is Alex Horne. Alex Horne is my dream guest for the podcast. Just because how he comes up with all the tasks, he does most of the writing. I would love to sit him down and talk about his attitude to play, how he gets all those ideas. But I'll never get him. But he would be my dream guest.
Have you asked him?
No, I have not asked him. I might ask him. You never know.
You should just ask him.
He's a busy man.
But I'm sure they're busy, man. But busy people are the best people to speak to, because busy people will... If I say to a busy person, if I say to a non-busy person, can you do this time on this particular time, then they will basically they'll be like, oh, let me check the diary, I'll get back to you. I'm usually like that, if I say to a busy person, then if I say to a busy person kind of like, can you do the 9th of October at 8 p.m, they'll be like, yup, I've got it. They'll be able to tell me kind of straight.
I'll be there. Nailed in. Yeah, I think that's because when you're I'm slightly wary of this busy person, not busy person, but I know what you're saying. Somebody who finds their time very constrained, you just lock it in because otherwise it's not going to happen. I think you're just much more. You just have to be more disciplined with things, I suppose.
And I think just getting it done, just getting it done as well. I mean, that's why when we were talking, it's like, well, when can we do it? And I was straight in and go, can you do this day at this time? And the reason for that is if we muck about with weeks and months and minutes and stuff like that, then I know the conversation can go on for months to try and get something kind of sorted out. And
exactly. And it's just faffy and it gets boring.
Yeah. So are you going to ask Alex Horn on the show then?
I will. Okay. I will ask Alex Horn on the show. It will not work, but I will try.
I think you just do it. Reach out through Twitter.
Okay.
And just say hello.
I will, of course. He's on Twitter a fair amount. It's actually him as well.
It is. And you can obviously, I know he listens. I'll tell you what. I'll race you. We'll ask at the same time.
Get him on.
We'll ask at the same time. I'll tell you what.
He's a fellow podcaster. And there should be. Isn't there not a union rule, the National Union of Podcasters, that you have to appear when another podcaster invites you on?
That sounds an amazing rule.
Unless you invoke Article 23/B.
I can't believe. So they've sent you the rules, have they? Because I never got a copy.
Yeah, I mean that's a weighty thing to do if you're invoking.
I'm so incandescent with rage at the moment of the fact I've not even got the badge. Did they give you the badge?
You haven't got the badge. National Union of Podcasters. You've not got that.
Did you get the badge?
Well, I got the "I love the sound of my own voice" T-shirt.
You got that?
Yeah, I got the and the inflated ego cap. Yeah.
Just.
I haven't got a microphone that works particularly well, but
I just can't. It's no words. If people have
there's no words.
If people have listened along tonight and they want to find out where you exist on the internet webs, Mr. Podcast Boy,
hello,
with your cap and your T-shirt and your badge, where can they find you on the internet webs?
Yes. Well, you can look for me, Max Davie, if you want to hear me ranting on about Brexit, child health, and I'm currently very angry about how rude people are in politics. Or if you want to go particularly podcasty, it's Play Is The Thing 1 on Twitter and Play Is The Thing on Facebook. And if you just look up Play Is The Thing podcast, we're on iTunes and we're on all of your podcast dealers of choice. You will find us there.
Imagine it's just like this show, but the main host isn't a fucking idiot, and you've got it.
Why? Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
I think you're exciting my dog with that chat.
Thank you for coming on.
That's not a euphemism.
Sounds like doctor. If you want to keep an eye on what we get away with your filth. If you want to keep an eye on what we're up to, go to the internet web, search for We're Not Wizards, and you'll find us in all the little kind of worn out faces, worn out places. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, the website, which is we'renotwizards.com, the blog, which we're just getting reviews out left, right and centre. I'd really appreciate if you had a look at that. It's we'renotwizards.blogspot.com. If you like what you listen to and you want to subscribe, jump onto a podcast catcher of choice that either has the word pod or cast or neither, like Spotify, because we're on Spotify. If you like it even more, you can jump onto Apple Podcasts. You can drop us a rating, a review, or a subscription. If you are going to be dropping us a rating or review, don't give us 10 stars, because it makes me big-headed. But don't give us 1 star, because I don't know what I'll do if I get 1 star, really. It could be quite sad. I
think that would be very sad.
It would be very sad indeed. Give us something in the middle, like a 5, because it's average. And we're just
it's a nice number.
Yeah, it's a lovely kind of roundish number. But the person who's not been average is rather wonderful, rather fantastic. He's a player. He's a player.
I'm anything but that.
It's Dr. Max Davie. Yeah. Hello.
Goodbye, rather.
And there's only 2 more things to do. The first thing is to remember that we're many things, but we're not wizards. Are we wizards, Max?
We are not, I'm afraid.
That's fine. I might be. And the other thing is to say goodbye. So it's a goodbye from Max. Say goodbye, Max.
Goodbye, Max.
And it's a goodbye from me. Remember, stay safe, roll sixes, make something awful. And check out Plays the Thing, because it's really, really interesting and I hate it. But until the next time, goodbye.
A wizard is never late. Nor is he early. He arrives precisely when he means to.